Welcome, everybody. I am Jacqueline Pitts. I am the Director of Communications here at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you for joining us for our last in our webinar series about the elections, the 2020 elections. We kind of saved these two for last because it's usually a crowd favorite. These two do not need much introduction. We have Matt Jones, who is the host of Kentucky Sports Radio, Scott Jennings, who is the co-founder of RunSwitch PR and a CNN contributor. And we are going to jump right into it because we have a lot of ground to cover, and these two can definitely talk about all of it at length. So obviously, I want to get started with what happened last night, the confirmation of our new Supreme Court justice here in the country. Scott, I'm going to start with you. How does this impact the election? What does this mean for the next week?
I ultimately am not sure it impacted the election that much, except for it did remind some, I think, recalcitrant Republicans why Donald Trump exists in the first place. I mean, I think it's a fair argument that he won the election in 2016 because of a Supreme Court vacancy. Now, we don't have a vacancy now, but he has been good on this issue, obviously working with Mitch McConnell. There's no Supreme Court vacancies, and there are no circuit court vacancies either in the United States, thanks to those two. So whatever you think about him on other issues or, personality-wise, he has fulfilled that promise, which was the promise that brought home nervous Republicans in the last election. Now, that having been said, turnout was already jacked. Democrats want to vote, Republicans want to vote. That was true before the vacancy. I think it's true after the vacancy. So overall electoral impact, minimal. I do think maybe in some Senate races that had more rural populations, it was probably a net positive for those candidates.
Matt, what do you think?
I don't think it has any impact on the presidential race. I think, for better or worse, the presidential race is about Donald Trump. It's always been about Donald Trump. It's going to be about Donald Trump and whether or not people love him or hate him. And I don't think, there's a few people that, Scott's right, there's a handful of Republicans who don't like Donald Trump who go, but you know what, I like that we get to appoint these Supreme Court justices. I think for a lot of them, though, what I always say is, well, so would any president. I mean, any Republican president. It's not like Donald Trump would have been the one. But that might make them not want to vote for Joe Biden. But I think even that is a minuscule amount of people. I do think it probably in Kentucky helps Mitch McConnell a little bit. And the reason I would say that is, I think Donald Trump Republicans are different than Mitch McConnell Republicans. Donald Trump Republicans are different than Kentucky Chamber Republicans. And Amy McGrath or anyone that wants to run against Mitch McConnell, part of the job was to separate the Donald Trump Republicans and the Mitch McConnell Republicans. I don't think ultimately she was very successful at that. But if those people exist, I think a Supreme Court justice reminds the Trump voters who don't like McConnell, well, I don't like him, but you know what? He helps get these judges across. So I do think to some extent, I don't know that's a large amount of people, but it's some. But ultimately, the effects of this will be on the court in the next 20 years. It'll be on politics in the next 20 years, how sort of nasty it gets. But for this election, I don't think it matters unless it gets to the court and they decide it. Then it might matter, but I don't think it'll matter otherwise.
I think Matt makes an excellent point on the impact in Kentucky. I mean, it was another reminder of just how in the middle of everything Mitch McConnell is, which is sort of his central argument, right? Which is, Kentucky punches above its weight. I'm in the middle of everything important that's happening. That was true on the Supreme Court issue, and that was a reminder of that. The Barrett confirmation process reminded me a lot of John Roberts. I worked on the Roberts and Alito confirmations when I served in the Bush White House. The Alito confirmation was a real battle. The Roberts confirmation was easy because he was so dang smart. And ultimately, Barrett proved to be, every time she was in a room with members of the U.S. Senate, she was the smartest person in the room. And it became quite clear quite immediately. So there was not as much drama or as much fight in it because she was good. And I think it was fait accompli from the beginning because McConnell had his conference on lockdown.
Yeah, I do. On that note, I think the McConnell argument that he makes in campaigns, which is, you get me, I'm bigger than everybody else. So there are many reasons I don't think that clicks for Kentuckians, and that's a different conversation. But the courts are the one thing he can point to. It's not uniquely Kentucky. I think what McConnell's done on the courts is awful, especially with Garland and all that. But put that to the side. If you care about the courts, McConnell can definitely take credit for what has happened. And so I do think it matters to the people. Now, with that said, I sometimes will do on my show, name the Supreme Court justices. And it's amazing how few people can name any of them.
Absolutely.
So ultimately, I think people like us care about it. The average person, they're voting on the economy, COVID, and that kind of stuff. They're not voting on Amy Coney Barrett.
All right, let's talk about the debates. You've seen some people, and last week in a webinar we did with Damon Thayer and Morgan McGarvey said, the debates, if you are still undecided at this point, I would love to talk to you after this because I don't know how many people it's helping decide at all. But in the opinion of the two of you, and I'm sure you might feel very similarly to that statement, but who have the debates benefited the most? And I'll start with Matt on that one.
No one. I mean, certainly not humanity. I would say the first debate hurt Donald Trump a little bit because if there's all right, so I think there's this group of people out there that maybe like some of Donald Trump's policies, but are worn out by him and just like, I can't deal with that personality anymore. And that debate sort of reminded them about the parts of his personality that they really don't like. Again, I don't think this is a lot of people. I think most people knew who they were voting for in May, and they're going to vote the same way now. So to that extent, maybe a small group. I don't think the second debate mattered at all. I think, again, maybe some people were like, well, he seemed more presidential, but he's been president for 4 years. So you know what he's going to act like. You're either all right with that or you're not. He's going to be what he's going to be. So I don't think it's mattered. Here was my one thing about the debates. Joe Biden had to get through those debates without really screwing up, without having people, because, there's this narrative that he's old and he's senile and all that. If he had had a bad moment in front of America with everyone watching, that could have been a game changer for the race. So as a person who wants him to win, I was holding my breath both nights, and I think he passed that test, so I don't think it matters.
What about you, Scott?
Yeah, I don't disagree with quite a bit of what Matt said. I think had the debate performances been reversed, had Trump turned in his last debate back in September, we would be having a different conversation about the national race today. But he didn't. And there was no middle debate, there to clean it up. I think the last two debates, the VP debate and then the final Trump-Biden debate, I thought Pence won and I thought Trump won. But again, the first debate set the narrative on this. And I said that night on CNN, it's one thing to be on offense and it's quite another thing to be offensive. And I thought Trump crossed that line. And so you look at the lens of these races through audience. What audiences was he trying to speak to that night? And you could see it in the polling. His problems with seniors was exacerbated. His problems with women was exacerbated by his performance that night. And these are things that existed before the debate. But, in debates, you're trying to either fix things that people don't like about you or at least not exacerbate problems you already have. And he failed on both of those fronts. I do find it interesting. We had all this debate season. Foreign policy never came up. And it's arguably one of Trump's best issues, right? He's got these Middle East peace deals. We didn't start any new wars. I think the number of U.S. casualties overseas is lower than the last several presidents for Trump. So he actually has some foreign policy successes, but this has been basically a domestic election, and Trump didn't shoehorn those issues into the debate when it might have helped him.
Yeah, I mean, he can't stay out of his own way. I mean, he'll actually have a couple of moments that even people like me will go, well, you know what, those deals with the countries in the Middle East recognizing Israel, those are important. I mean, they're small countries, but they're important. But like, he can't even let himself have an hour of good news without tweeting something ridiculous that completely changes the narrative. I think Scott makes a really good point about the order of debates. The first debate's the one that matters. That's the one everybody watches. That's I think with Obama, Romney made it a race because he did so well in the first debate and Obama did not. And a race that kind of shouldn't have been close became a lot closer. I think that was Trump's moment to do it. He had had a number of weeks of bad news. He'd had a number of weeks of bad things he'd said. And here was his chance to sort of say, all right, let me right the ship. And he ended up doing crazy things. But really, I want to go back. Whoever you thought won the second debate, and I think it's kind of in the eye of the beholder, Biden was really a lot better, I think, than a lot of people thought. And I think one of the biggest mistakes the Trump campaign made was for months telling America Biden was senile, he was dumb, he was hiding in his basement. They set the expectation so low that when he came in and was normal, he won to people, or at least didn't lose. always build your opponent up. I go on radio and say, Scott Jennings is really smart, so that when we come and do these things, that people, have high expectations. If you come out and say your opponent is dumb and then they're just average, they win.
Now, I asked you guys to behave beforehand, and I am the host of this webinar, so I can make a reminder there as well. But let's talk about polling. Polling has been an interesting thing in races for the last couple of years in particular. I mean, in the gubernatorial race here in Kentucky a couple of years ago, it was off. It's been off in a lot of ways, and people question it quite a bit. Scott, where do you think polling is at right now? Where, in terms of the presidential race, what do you see in terms of polling? And I think Frank Luntz recently said, like, if this election is off in terms of the polling, we have to completely get rid of it or reevaluate. So how do you feel about polling, and where do you see who's winning according to the polling right now?
Well, I agree with Frank. If Donald Trump wins this election, every pollster and every forecaster in America will be applying for work at one of the companies that's represented on this webinar today, because they need to be out of a job. I think it's true that Joe Biden has a larger national lead than Hillary Clinton did at this time. I think it's also true that we have more high quality state by state polling than we had this time. I think it's also objectively true that if you look at that state polling, Biden is ahead, but it's not overwhelmingly ahead. I mean, some of these states, it's 1, 2, 3 points, which, a polling error or some help from a field operation could certainly change the race. So I've talked to a lot of pollsters. I've interviewed a lot of pollsters. I've had a lot of pollsters come to my class, and I've asked them all the same question, and they all say the same thing, which is, the methods have been improved. We fixed the sampling issues related to people without college degrees, which I think messed up some of the polling last time. And therefore, structurally, the industry is more stable. I feel the same way I felt last time. The polling tells me that Donald Trump should not win. There's a few things out there that tell me he might. I said last time I thought he had a 40% chance of winning. I think that this time. Doesn't mean he will win. Doesn't mean he has a 0% chance of winning either. I do think it's a virtual lock that he will lose the national popular vote, but he could lose the national popular vote by 5 million votes and still win the election. And so I think, for instance, I think Joe Biden's probably going to win California by more than any presidential candidate's ever won it by. So the popular vote disparity will be wider there, but it won't change the electoral college. I think this is also just a test of field operation. We know what the polls say. The Trump campaign has been investing in and running a traditional field effort. They're knocking on doors, doing voter registration. The Democrat campaign manager said a few weeks ago, door knocking doesn't matter anymore. So if Trump somehow were to pull it off, it would be a triumph of traditional field tactics over, whatever it is the Biden campaign would call what they've done. So I guess I will stand up for the pollsters in that A, they did not mess up the national popular vote in 2016. They got it right. B, they did not get some of the states right. And C, it appears there's been an effort to correct those errors this time around. And by the way, the polling wasn't really wrong in 2018, and we saw what happened in that election. So I'm not a pollster, but I am pollster adjacent, and I've talked to them enough to know that maybe they've cleaned up their act a bit.
There's a lot of stuff on this, and I agree with almost everything Scott said. I'd say this: if the pollsters are on this time, I'm never listening to them again. And that's not to say that they are bad at their job. If they're wrong this time, I think it just means we're in a world where we just don't know how to poll people, period. Because we don't know who answers the phone. We don't know how to get a hold of people. So if they're wrong this time, I just don't know what to do about that. So with that said, here's why I think they're probably right. Scott's exactly right. What they got wrong last time was really in-state polls, non-college white people. They just did not get non-college rural white Americans polled correctly. They didn't in Kentucky in 2014 in the Senate race. They didn't in Kentucky in 2015 in the governor's race. And then they didn't in 2016 all across these state polls. Now, they say, and Scott may know more about this than me, that they have corrected their methods to make that better. And in 2018, that sort of showed. If that ends up being the case, then you could argue that Biden's lead is even more impressive, Because if they have actually corrected and found these Trump voters that they missed last time, and he's still winning by these amounts, then that almost means his lead seems even more safe. Now, there's two issues that worry me. I'm a worrywart. I think if you look at the numbers, Biden's winning. But here's why I worry. Number one, I think this is going to be a massive turnout election. The kind of turnout election that is really hard to poll, because we make assumptions in polls about who's going to show up. And I'm kind of the belief everybody's showing up. And if everybody shows up, what does that mean? We have massive early voting. Okay, well, what does that mean? That's giving a lot of people more chances to do this. And how does that work? And then finally, I do think the one objective number that worries me as a Democrat is that Republicans did a very good job in Pennsylvania, Florida, and Wisconsin of registering new Republicans. They have a big registration advantage of new voters in those states. Now, who are those people? Are those Democrats who are voting for Trump and they're just now flipping their registration like happens in Kentucky a lot? Or are they new people that didn't vote that they went and found? We might not know that till election day. And so that is the one number that I look at and go, well, that worries me. With that said, all the other numbers are good for Biden. He's got many different states he can win. If we assume he wins Wisconsin and Michigan, which I think he will, then Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona win one. And they're each four very different demos in all those states. So unless Trump has somehow found a way to connect to all four of those demos, Biden's got to find one.
I sort of, Jacqueline, feel like I do about this election, you know, how I sort of feel about the Kentucky Derby most years. We're cursed by knowledge. We all sit and study the racing form. And as soon as the race is over, we look at it and go, oh, of course that horse won. It was right here. It was right here. And after this election, no matter who wins, we'll all go, of course they won, because it was right in front of our face. Because you could make a case, you know, of course Donald Trump lost. His job approval on coronavirus is terrible. How could you possibly win? Or of course Joe Biden lost. He never left his house. How could he win? You know, I mean, there'll be these, we'll all have these of course moments, no matter what happens. It sort of reminds me of going to Churchill.
That's very, very true. And Matt makes a great point about thinking about who we think is going to vote versus who's actually going to vote. I mean, we had huge turnout in the primary, and especially this, let's talk about the voting system. We talked about it a little last time the three of us were together, but you know, we didn't know at that point if we would still be in the same situation as the general. Here we are, very similar systems, some changes, some more in-person polling locations, but still people doing their absentee voting, and big numbers so far already with early voting too. So who does that help? How does this impact things? And do we think it's going to be a bigger turnout than it would have been outside of this voting system?
Well, traditionally.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, well, I was going to say, traditionally, Democrats are the voters that show up less than Republicans. So traditionally, a high turnout election would impact positively for Democrats. But a lot of Trump voters have the same characteristics as the Democrats that don't show up in other elections. So again, I don't know, Trump voters are different than your average Republican. And so I'm not sure how that'll play out. I want to give a positive shout out to Kentucky and to the Secretary of State here, because you're seeing right now with cases going to the Supreme Court and in Pennsylvania where there's two signatures and it throws a lot about, like there are a couple states that have many chaoses. And I got to give our Secretary of State and the governor, but really Secretary of State did most of the work on it, credit for the policy of how this Kentucky election is going. The early voting, I think, is very successful. I think you're going to have, hopefully, not a lot of problems on election day, like could have been. At this point in Kentucky, if you want to vote, you've had your chance. Like there's nobody who can say they couldn't have voted in this point. So I think in Kentucky, things are going pretty well. I think you have to watch out two states, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Wisconsin, because of the late ballot issue. Now you can't have ballots that come after election day, the Supreme Court said. Are people waiting to do that? I don't really know. And then Pennsylvania, they're stupid. It's kind of like the Florida hanging chads in 2008. The stupid, you got to sign two things. And if you don't sign them both exactly the same, that could be a problem. Those are the only two issues I see that I am worried about.
Well, I would just like it noted that I was reliably informed by the national media that voter suppression is a major problem, but Matt says anybody who wants to vote can vote. And so
in Kentucky,
totally
that's true. Scott, I mean, you saw me during the primary taking up as many progressives in the media said Kentucky's system was not fair, and it was, and they were wrong about that.
Well, I mean, it wasn't fair to Charles Booker. I mean, you know, if we had, if I mean, the way it all worked out, if it had all happened on one day, he likely would have won the race. But I digress. Look, everybody's going to vote. Who knew that all we needed to fix American democracy was Donald Trump? Now everybody wants to vote, and everybody can vote, and everybody is voting. I think turnout in Kentucky will be 70%, possibly more. Nationally, it might be a tick lower, but I think millions upon millions of people who didn't participate before are going to participate. That is a good thing. I do think it's noteworthy that more people have voted in person early in Kentucky than have voted by mail. And the Republicans are dominating the in-person, which I'm not sure I would have predicted a month and a half ago. So I find that interesting statistically, and it bodes well, obviously, for Republican candidates here. I agree with Matt on Pennsylvania. You know, they have no demonstrable history with this, just like us, but they are trying to build a system while they're trying to build an aircraft carrier while taking off from it, and it's not going well. And if the race were just separated by a few thousand votes there, well, you've already had several thousand people that have had their ballots invalidated because of, you know, they didn't do it correctly, which I think is, if somebody thinks they filled out their ballot and it gets tossed, you know, that's not how you want to win an election. So I think we're in for some litigation if the race comes down to Pennsylvania. I think this, if we're going to have election period instead of election day, I don't love it. But if we're going to do it this way, I think we need to rethink the political calendar. Like having a debate last week makes no sense. All these debates should be in like August and September. If we're going to start voting in September or early October, we should have the debates before people start voting. And I think we got to correct that next time around. And so, you know, and by the way, I should say, Mike Adams, old friend of mine, my college roommate, doing a terrific job. You know, he's taking a little flack out there from people, but Kentucky is doing a better job with a new system than other states like Pennsylvania. So like, if you just consider that we have no history with this either, yet it seems to be running relatively smoothly, you know, from a technical perspective, I think Mike and the clerks deserve a lot of credit for that.
Let's talk about who's voting too. So there's a big talking point this election in particular about suburban moms deciding this election. And so let's talk a little bit about that, who you all think that benefits in the long run, and also what it means for the state and local races, especially in bigger cities like Lexington and Louisville, where you have, especially in Louisville and Lexington, you've got some Republicans in those areas who are in races that are pretty close now. So how does this impact them?
Well, the suburban moms don't like Donald Trump, and they shouldn't. I mean, for all his talk, you can see that that's the case when he literally goes on stage and goes, "Please like me." When you have to tell people to please like you, they don't like you, as Jeb Bush showed in 2016.
Please
so
clap.
Please clap. And to me, I think for the suburban moms, and I don't just forget about just suburban moms, women in general, especially women who are professionals and educated, they have had to deal with men like Donald Trump their entire lives. They have had to deal with men who think they're smarter than everybody else, who talk over them, who are complete, goobers as humans, and they've had to deal with them. Every woman knows somebody like that. And when they see Trump, it makes them think of the worst of the people that they've had to deal with. And I think that's why he does so poorly with them. I think it is personality, and it is, you have to deal with dudes that aren't as smart as they think they are and sure act like it all the time. And they're just tired of people like that, especially ones with some of the other stuff in his background. I think that's what hurts him. And now, I don't know whether it goes beyond Trump. I think a lot of the reasons they don't like Trump are Trump, period. Now, I've had some people tell me in Kentucky state races that they think in the suburbs, the Republicans are vulnerable. The problem is some of these Republican candidates, though, are not like Trump. Like, I'll give you, take Andy Barr. Okay. Andy Barr, I mean, I'm not going to vote for Andy Barr, but Andy Barr is not Donald Trump. I mean, he doesn't act like that. And I think a lot of people, especially in the Lexington area, know Andy Barr. And I don't think they sort of take their negative Trump feelings to him. Jason Nemes in Louisville is another example of a person that I don't think people consider him to be like Donald Trump. But there's no doubt, suburbs, specifically women in the suburbs, Trump is a huge downer.
Well, I mean, the gaping chest wound in Donald Trump's ability to get reelected has been women from the beginning. I mean, I'm only moderately good at math, but last time I checked, women make up roughly half the country, and he's minus 20 among women, and it's just really hard to win a national election when one of the two genders is so unhappy with you. On the flip side, the Trump campaign has tried to make inroads with male voters that are non-traditional voting Republicans to try to make up the difference. It's just there's a smaller pool of that than there is generally women who don't like Trump. A lot of them do live in the suburbs. I think the question for some of these Republican candidates that Matt mentioned is the yoga dads. You talk about the yoga moms a lot, but there's been some pollsters and some evidence that some of the yoga dads are wavering. Certainly it happened a little bit in 2018 in a couple of places. A lot of them came home, some didn't. The question is this time, are the suburban dads who are married to these suburban moms gonna follow their wives here? And I think in that last debate, if Trump did anything, he might have reminded some of them, okay, I remember now why I can stomach you, because I like your policies and I generally like what you've done as president. But it is exceedingly difficult to win a race with a gender gap this large. And also, ticket splitting is, I think, minimal in a presidential campaign year. In fact, the Pew Research outfit had a study last week. Only 4% of Americans said they plan to split their tickets between president and U.S. Senate. Problem for Amy McGrath, of course, but it wouldn't be a problem in a state that, Joe Biden was winning if you were the Democrats. And so ticket splitting, I think, is more likely to manifest itself in a midterm. So it's you raise the core issue of this election for Trump, and that is if he loses, we'll probably look back and say, of course, how do you win when women are so against you? And it's not just a certain kind of woman, suburban women, white women, black women, senior women, Hispanic women, across the board, women just don't like Trump as much as men, and it may ultimately suck him under. We'll see.
So going back to kind of the voting system, in the primary, it wasn't as big of a deal, but on election night, we probably will not know who won. So what does that do for, do you feel like we will know that night, especially with the mail-in ballots and things like that? And if not, what does that do for kind of how everybody reacts immediately?
I think we will know in Kentucky what happened here. I think, overall,
yeah.
I mean, the states I'm watching are Florida, Ohio, and Texas. I think we should know in those states, specifically Florida. If Biden were to win Florida, it's probably game over for Trump. And they do a pretty good job of counting their ballots on election night. And I think Ohio has a similar counting system, and Texas hasn't had as much mail-in voting. So if Biden were to win any of those three states, it really destabilizes Trump's ability to win. Now, if Trump wins all three of those, then I think we're going to be counting in Pennsylvania. It takes a few days in Arizona, might take a few days in Michigan. So there's other places, but to me, the domino to watch is one of those three: Florida, Ohio, Texas.
I think we'll know on election night. If we don't know on election night, then I think that means we might not know for a long time just because of how this stuff goes. I think he hits it. For me, first of all, if he wins Ohio or Texas, then it's a rout, and we're going to know it's a rout at that moment. I mean, especially Texas. If Biden were to somehow win Texas, then he's winning all these states, and he's getting 400 electoral votes. That, I kind of don't think that's going to happen. I also don't really think he's going to win Ohio. If he wins Ohio, there's really no world where he wins Ohio but doesn't win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So if he wins Ohio, it's over. Florida's the one, because Florida, he's right. We'll know Florida on election night. If it's enough of a win that Florida gets called, then Biden's the president. If he doesn't, Scott, you may know, what's the North Carolina counting system? Because to me, North Carolina is the state talked about the least that should be talked about the most. because North Carolina, I could see a world. There is a world where Biden loses Pennsylvania but wins the election in North Carolina because of suburban moms. North Carolina is full of suburbs of Charlotte, suburbs of Raleigh, suburbs of Durham, Chapel Hill. There's a lot of that. I went to school there, and that is a sneaky state. I mean, listen, they're about to have a Supreme Court there. It's all elected and it's partisan. They're all going to be Democrats. The state is totally flipping. Scott, do we know that on election night, North Carolina? Because that's the one I think could put him over the top.
Yeah, in North Carolina, they cannot actually count the mail-in ballots until Election Day, but they're having a lot of in-person voting. And so I think at a minimum, you'll see extremely advanced results on election night. And so if everything goes to, if there's no breakdowns in the system, I think North Carolina, even if all the votes aren't in, you'll have a really good idea of what happened. And their polls close, I think, 7:30 Eastern. So it's an earlier close.
So that's my view. I think we won't know Pennsylvania probably for sure. I think Florida's a complete toss-up because who knows what happens in Florida. I think Biden is named president on election night because of North Carolina.
Let's talk about what people are voting on. Matt, you kind of touched on it with COVID and things like that. We've also had 2020, we've had a lot of things happen, as we all know. There's been a lot of racial inequity talk, protests, COVID. What of those things still matter right now in terms of people going to the polls and casting their ballot? What do you think that they're really voting on, or did they just decide based on a party?
I think it depends on the person, but let's talk about groups. I think the two groups that will have changed, if Biden wins, and like Scott says, we look and see why, we'll talk about suburban women, but we kind of saw that coming in 2018. Senior citizens will be what elected Joe Biden. And because I think Trump won those by like 12 or 14 last time, 65 and over. And the polls suggest Biden is winning that group now, which is, I'll be honest with you, kind of surprising to me. But if he wins, then why is he winning? COVID. That's why he's winning. Because COVID kills disproportionately seniors. They're scared. And the message the president has given, which is, this isn't that big a deal. Everybody get over it. Masks are stupid, all that stuff. The people that care about that the most are these senior citizens who may be the ones dying. And to me, that's the only explanation. How do you explain plus 14 last time, lose this time, except COVID? Now, on the other side, there are some Trump voters that I think are more passionate about him because of, quote, law and order stuff. And that's the protest, that in some places had riots. I do think that matters to some people, and I think it matters strongly. My sense is those are people who like Trump anyway. Like, I don't think there's that. I think Trump has really wanted to do this fear of, hey, suburbs, they're coming for you. I just don't think that's worked. I mean, I think if that was going to work, when he stood outside with that Bible and looked ridiculous, that it went away then. But I do think there are people who have become passionate about him because of that issue. But I think COVID changes the election, and I think it does it with seniors.
I think that the question you're asking, Jacqueline, really gets to the heart of the issue, and that is framing. I think in order for Trump to have won the election, he really needed to frame it for people as a choice between his policies and Joe Biden's policies. And if Biden wins, it means he was successful at framing it up as a referendum on Trump's job approval, largely on coronavirus, but on Trump, the person. And I think if you look at the issue sets and you look at what each candidate's supporters find important, you really do. It's really a sort of fascinating look at inside of under the hood of America. Both campaigns have supporters that care deeply about the economy, but healthcare. There was a Pew study in September. 84% of Biden supporters said healthcare was very important, but only 48% of Trump's. Supreme Court appointments, both were in the mid 60s. Coronavirus, 82% of Biden supporters said very important, only 39% of Trump's. Violent crime, as Matt mentioned, 74% of Trump supporters said important to me, only 46% of Biden's. Race and ethnic inequality, 76% of Biden supporters, yes, 24% of Trump supporters said the same. So you can see the disparity on these issues and whether you consider it to be important or not. But for Trump, the core issue has always been can we have a choice election? And the core issue for Biden has always been, can we have a referendum on Trump? And Trump's innate instinct to always make everything about him has actually played into Biden's hand. It's why Biden doesn't campaign, because he knows Trump will fill the void. And they believe at the Biden campaign that Trump filling the void on any given day is a net negative for Trump. And the Trump people believe that, this is the commodity we've got, and we're gonna ride it the same way we did before. It appears to me right now we're having a referendum election, but like I said, I think it's closer out there than people think.
Biden, people have been, especially on the left, are very critical of Biden, the way he campaigns, the things he believes. I mean, the right is critical too, but they just do that because they would do it for any Democrat. I think Biden has run an unbelievably smart race, actually, for all the reasons Scott just said. If this race was about what it normally is, which is what's the economy like, then Trump would win, right? I mean, he would win. But Biden has realized that the less he talks, the more the other guy screws up. And when the other guy's losing, you get out of his way. So when people criticize Biden for not campaigning more, being in his basement, it's the smartest thing he could have done. And what I think is amazing is in the primaries, everybody dismissed Biden. He was an old man. He was out of touch, new Democratic Party. Here's what they forgot. Black people hadn't voted yet. Rural people hadn't voted yet. And then when they did, they overwhelmingly went for Biden. Then in this election, people said, he can't handle Trump on a debate stage. He did fine. They said, hey, he's not vigorous enough. He did fine. Now he is helped by the fact we're in a time where you don't have to have rallies, right? Because he doesn't draw crowds. I was in Iowa with him. He doesn't draw crowds there. But the timing worked. And I think Biden's campaign has actually done an extremely impressive job. Of course, if they lose, everybody will say the opposite. But if they win, I think it's actually been impressive.
If they lose, we'll say, of course. How can you get elected president without campaigning? How can you get elected president when you don't do anything after 10 a.m. every day? I mean, it's easy to sit and prejudge these things, and it's easy to say it was brilliant today because we might be saying it was stupid next week, or vice versa. Ultimately, the Biden campaign placed a serious bet, and that bet was, we don't have to do a ton here. We just got to let Trump be Trump, and we'll see if the bet pays off. I mean, when you're running presidential campaigns, it's just about making big bets. And in 2016, Trump made a big bet on immigration, and in 2020, Joe Biden made a big bet on Trump. And so whether these bets pay off, you don't know until election night. But those are the bets that have been placed.
Let's move on to Mitch McConnell and Amy McGrath. I think everybody probably knows. Well, really, it's probably more relevant to talk about if McConnell keeps the Senate. So we'll get to that in a minute, though. But I do want to touch on the McGrath aspect of the race. I'll start with Matt. Is there any chance that she can win in this election?
No, but she's done better in the last month than she did in the year and a half before combined. Her ads are better. Her message is better. I thought she had a really good debate. I mean, I actually think Mitch McConnell's a pretty good debater. And I thought she did really well in that. So she's been better, but she dug herself way too big a hole to start with. Look, you're not going to beat Mitch McConnell in Kentucky unless you get 10% of this state to vote Trump you. It's the only way you're going to win. Well, who are the people out there voting Trump McGrath? Well, the only way you can do that is you got to get Trump voters to say, I like my man Donald, but Mitch X. And I think she just went about it the wrong way. She said, basically, I'm more Trump than him. Not one person on earth believes that. So what she should have done is what she's done a little bit recently, which is to say, like, he's not really helping us. The stimulus, for instance, that's something Trump Republicans would be for that McConnell's not. And but she didn't get that message until the end. She ended up handling things like the Black Lives Matter protests very poorly. She lost the liberal folks kind of threw their hands up. Some of the comments she made about Charles Booker in the primary, where she sort of mocked him for not being able to pay his staff health care, those all blew up in her face. So she's not going to win. I think she's done better, though, in the last month, but it's too late. In an election where Trump's going to win Kentucky, what do you think Trump wins Kentucky by, Scott? 20, probably?
I think he probably winds up 58, 59.
Okay, so if it's 20, you got to do 10 points better than him, and I just don't think she can do it.
I think what I find remarkable about this race is she is going to end up spending maybe north of $100 million. And all the polling I've seen, publicly and privately, tell me that she is in exactly the same place any Democrat off the street would be if their name were on the ballot who had spent $0. I mean, she is currently, according to the polling, sitting at 41%, which is what any Democrat could, out of the phone book, which is a smaller phone book these days, but I digress. But if you pick any Democrat, they would be sitting in the same place after $100 million. I find this remarkable. They have so much money. They're running her campaign and they're running the Libertarians' campaign. You know, they're going to put a few million behind this Libertarian. Any Republicans watching this know you've gotten a number of mail pieces at your house. There's $1 million worth of TV advertising on the TV this week for the Libertarian that's coming from the Democrats. Find it amazing. After $100 million invested in McGrath, they've decided that, well, we have to invest in somebody no one's ever heard of because investing in McGrath is not working. I think McConnell is likely to win by 10 to 12 points. I think that Trump is likely to win the state in the high 50s. I think that the amount of money spent here, and McConnell's going to spend, I don't know, 60 million. Outside groups are going to spend. I mean, the amount of money spent here to get generically what, you know, we probably could have predicted at the outset of this thing is really a stunning thing. Taxes are not high enough in California because the amount of money these celebrities have flushed down the toilet here is just astonishing. Amy McGrath's campaign has run ads in San Francisco, in Washington, D.C. They're funding the Libertarians' campaign. They have unlimited money. And yet, here she sits at 41% on the ballot, less than a week from the election. I just find that stunning. I mean, if I handed any of you $100 million and said, go sell a product, you wouldn't even ask me what the product is. You'd say, okay, with $100 million, I could probably sell it. Except these folks couldn't sell Amy McGrath. Pretty amazing.
I want to thank them, though. I need to thank them because those of us, I'm not just saying this. There are radio stations and television stations in this state that every night go to bed thanking the Lord for Amy McGrath, Mitch McConnell, and this race. Because in the COVID era, this has been awful for advertising in every media thing, especially TV and radio, because the first thing people pull when stuff's going bad is media buy. Amy McGrath and Mitch McConnell have kept the media market in Kentucky, have kept us afloat. I mean, I'm not even exaggerating. My radio show, if you turn on my radio show, every break is at least one Amy McGrath ad. Every other break is a Mitch McConnell ad. And now every third break is a Brad Barron ad, the Libertarian. Thank you. I appreciate it because you kept iHeart, WKYT, WLEX, WHS, all of us, we all thank you because you really helped us get through COVID unlike anything else.
That's a very good point. So let's talk about, and I've heard people.
See, you've been complaining that McConnell hasn't provided enough stimulus, and yet here you are. Listen, several beach houses based on.
Let me tell you something. I will always. Anybody watching this knows I'm not a fan of Mitch, and Amy and I have had our issues too. But I thank them both on election night. I'll say to both of them, thank you very much. Kentucky Sports Radio very much appreciates it.
I will make a bold prediction that the 2022 Senate race won't be nearly as impactful on the number of beach houses you own as this one was. It'll be good, but it won't be quite as good.
Yeah, you can see all the luxury right behind me right here.
So almost as important as anything else, I've even heard some Republicans say, I don't care if Biden is president as long as McConnell can hold the Senate, because that's so critically important if he is president. So, but there are a couple races that I'm sure you, Scott, you're watching very closely in particular. So let's start with you. Can Republicans hold the U.S. Senate? And if they can't, what does that look like under either administration?
Yeah, great question. And whoever is saying that is a very smart political observer, because no matter who the president is, the Senate obviously can really stifle you or help you. I think the Senate is on a knife's edge right now. I do think it will be difficult for Republicans to maintain an outright majority. I think it's possible that it ends up 50-50, which would, of course, toss it to whoever wins the presidential election. The races that I'm looking at, of course, are, the closest ones are Arizona, Maine, North Carolina, Iowa. Those are the closest ones in my opinion. The two races in Georgia, I think, could be both headed to a runoff, it seems like. I think Republicans are fairly stable in Texas and Montana and Alaska, even Kansas now. I think Lindsey Graham is likely to win in South Carolina. I think Republicans will win in Alabama. That gives them their only pickup. The Michigan race is interesting. Republicans are very high on John James. I think, if Trump doesn't win Michigan and it's a fairly wide margin, it makes it much harder for Mr. James, but he has run an amazing race. In Maine, one of the biggest problems Senator Collins has is the ranked choice voting system, which may prove to be an obstacle for her. So I think right now, I think a 50-50 Senate would be a good outcome for Republicans. It's conceivable it could be 51-49. I think if, no matter who the president is, if Democrats get control of the Senate, having 50 or 51 or 52 makes it harder to do some of the more radical things that some of the Democrats want done. If it's a wave election and they end up with 53, 54, 55 senators, then it puts things in play like court packing and eliminating the filibuster, which would be extremely bad for businesses, I can assure you. My bet is it's a narrower margin, but this has always been a defensive year for Republicans. It's shaping up that way, and the money disparity it's manifested itself in Kentucky, but it's really been at play in every race. Democrats have an unlimited amount of money. For my whole career, Republicans have always had more money, except in 16. Starting in 16, Democrats have spent more and more, and this year it's not even close in some of these Senate races. So now Democrats are the party with all the money, and it makes a huge difference. I mean, if you can advertise and double up your opponent in some cases on television, it makes a huge difference. I think TV ads are less impactful at the presidential level, but in Senate races and congressional races, they are definitely impactful. So I will just say, I think if Joe Biden wins this race, the best possible thing that could happen to him is that Republicans hold the Senate. It will save him so much grief. If Biden wins and the Democrats have a Senate majority, the civil war in the Democratic Party that will erupt over the push by the progressives to do extremely radical, norm-busting things will be hard on Joe Biden. And this has been one of the Republican arguments, that he won't be able to withstand it. If the Republicans were to control the Senate, he could just blame it on Mitch. Well, I don't have the votes. Mitch, we can't do it. But if the Democrats control it all, the pressure on Biden to do radical things will be very high. And I think watching that dynamic unfold inside the Democratic Party will be really fascinating.
Couple things. First of all, there's too much money in these races. He's right. Now the Democrats have all of it, but Mitch only has himself to blame. This system, which is a disaster, which some folks watching this disagree with me on, it is a disaster. There's too much money, too much dark money. Mitch McConnell created the system, so he can't whine about it now. Second thing, the civil war that's coming potentially for Democrats, if Trump loses, is definitely coming for Republicans, which is Trumpist versus Mitchist. And I think that's going to be fun to watch because they, at its core, really don't like each other. For the Senate, let's just do some math. Republicans are up 3 now. They're going to win Alabama. That's 4. Let's assume Biden wins. That means Democrats got to pick up 4. They're winning Colorado. Now we're down to 3. They're winning Arizona. Now we're down to 2. They're winning Maine. Now we're down to 1. The hard part for the Democrats is, where's the other 1? And that 1, nothing is certain. Could be North Carolina. That's probably the most likely one. If it's not we've got the sexting scandal. Could be Iowa because that woman doesn't know the price of soybeans and corn, which let me just be saying, if I was running in Iowa, I wouldn't know what the price of soybeans or corn are either, but apparently you need to know it in Iowa. That's the second best probability. Then I think you have to look at Georgia because there is a scenario where the Republicans win North Carolina and Iowa, and all of a sudden all of America goes to that runoff in Georgia because that runoff in Georgia, 2 potential races decide the control of the Senate. Imagine what that'll be like if that ends up happening. That will be wild. I think
you should start Georgia sports radio.
I'm going to
because you then will have more beach houses if you have your radio going in Georgia, because that will be the $500 million Senate endeavor.
It'll be unbelievable. So all of that is to say, I think it's probably likely the guy in North Carolina pulls it out and makes it 50-50. Iowa, it's hard for me to see a Democrat winning the Senate in Iowa and Trump winning the state. And it's hard for me to see a Biden win in Iowa. So I don't know. But I think what is very likely is that it all comes down to Georgia. If the guy in North Carolina doesn't win, it all comes down to Georgia. You're going to have an African-American minister in one of them, probably running against Kelly Loeffler, who's not the most likable person. And I think that race is very likely, because I think Ossoff is not as compelling as the minister. I think that race could decide control of the Senate, which means this never-ending campaign will continue for another month and a half.
True story. Why does everybody in North Carolina call it a sexting scandal? It's not sexting. He actually had sex. It's not a sexting scandal.
But here's why they do it. You guys, here's why they do it.
He deserves. This man did more. He went all the way.
Here's why they do it. The reason they do it is one of the things that's changed in politics in my mind is Donald Trump has made it to where there just aren't scandals anymore that connect. I mean, Donald Trump is one perpetual scandal. And then Republicans whine. Why isn't anybody focused on Hunter Biden? Because we've watched for 4 years. You just have one thing after another that people don't pay attention to. And so I sort of wonder, Scott, if the era of the political scandal is over, just because it's just it's almost overwhelming. And don't you think Trump has just changed the way people look at this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, he's lowered the bar for what constitutes scandal. The biggest scandal you can stumble into in politics these days is an authenticity scandal. When people believe that you are trying to be something you're not. Ask Amy McGrath. She started her campaign. I'm for Brett Kavanaugh. 24 hours later, I'm against Brett Kavanaugh. Well, I'm going to help Donald Trump more than Mitch McConnell. Then she gets into a primary and, pretends to be part of the resistance liberal faction. Now she's running ads saying she's going to protect the Second Amendment. The biggest scandal you can stumble into in politics is when people start to believe that what you're saying is different than what you would be saying if the cameras were off. And that's the thing that Trump has always had. They believe he's the same in private as he is in public. That's what Mitch McConnell has going for him. Love him or hate him, what he says in public is always what he's doing in private. Always tells you the truth. I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm going to do. The biggest scandals in politics are authenticity scandals. Are you telling me what you would tell me if the cameras were off? And
Did you just really say to these people with a straight face that Mitch McConnell always tells the truth? Did you really just say that?
Yeah. When does he not?
Listen, we only got a few minutes left. I don't even want to get into this.
When does
I wrote a book. I only wrote a 400-page book about the myriad of lies, but I'll just leave it at this. I will say this, though. I do think Mitch McConnell is the same person when the cameras are off. And I think it's less. I think people now assume all politicians lie. I do. I think they assume every politician is full of it. So weirdly, if you lie, like Biden about fracking, he said he was for it and then he's against it or whatever. I don't think that really works because people just assume all of you are lying. But when they think you're a different human when the camera is off, I do think that matters to people. And I think Scott's right. I think that Trump is Trump. We know he's like that all the time. I actually think Biden is Biden wherever he is. I think that's just kind of Hillary. People didn't feel that way about her really. And I think that is the authenticity is less about issues, I think, to people than just what kind of person are you? Are you what I see or not?
I think you've got it right. It's that question of, are you the same whether you're in public or not? And this is where Trump beat the rest of the politicians. He had a different rapper, and the rapper was, what you see is what you get. And I just think that sort of currency is the coin of the realm right now. Candidates that have it do very, very well. Booker had it in the Democratic primary. People believe he was authentically stating what he felt and what he would tell you privately. No one's ever thought that about McGrath. And so it just, and to Matt's point, issues aside, just do you believe what they would tell you in a one-on-one conversation is what they would say on the TV?
And in Kentucky, I think that's more important than in almost anywhere. In Kentucky, this is why Charles Booker connected. And I believe Charles would have done much better than Amy in this race. Is Charles is much more left than Amy. But I think people just thought, that's a real dude. That's a real guy. And I can connect with a real person. And I think Kentucky, we call BS in this state more than anywhere else. Like, we just don't like it if you are one thing and not the other. And, you know, Mitch is, I think people think, equally as boring off TV as he is on TV. And I think that's probably why there is a little authenticity in how people look at him, even though he doesn't always tell the truth.
The who do you want to have a beer thing.
You can't name a single thing. You just keep saying it.
Read the book. It's available at a bookstore near you, Scott, and you can read it. And
Andy Bashir told me I'm not allowed to go to places.
You're in it, so it's perfect.
What do you mean? I'm in it?
Oh, you're in it. Our last meeting on here, it ends up in the book. So it's
okay, good. I have to find that. Perfect.
All right, we technically only have a couple minutes left. A lot of people who registered for this discussion wanted to know what you guys think about the state house and state senate races. The state house, there's a couple contentious races going on. Same with the state senate too. Scott, I'll start with you. How do you feel some of those races are going to shake out? You know, we're watching things like Jason Nemus's race in Louisville, and even Chris McDaniel in Northern Kentucky, and the Johnny Ray Turner and the Johnny Turner in Eastern Kentucky. There's a lot of interesting races happening. So kind of give your take on a couple of those things.
Well, I'll generalize it by saying that I think that the general rural-urban divide that we have will manifest itself up and down the ballot. And so the urban suburban races will be tougher for Republicans, but there are some rural state house and state senate races that I think, mostly state house, but I think will break for the Republicans. So they're not, again, I think that the ticket splitting will be minimal. And so in the rural areas, if you expect Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell to do quite well, which I do, then you can see how that would affect voting up and down the ballot. The suburban races are interesting. I think some of it is going to depend on whether Democrats maximize this early voting period. Based on the data I've seen, I'm not totally convinced that they did get the numbers they wanted or needed. And so that would help a Nemus or a McDaniel. The McDaniel one's interesting because that's one of those weird counties, where all the Republicans in 19 won except Matt Bevin. And so you could see sort of a little bit of fluidity in it, and it's a suburban Cincinnati county. I ultimately think in the state house, Republicans are likely to pick up net a couple of seats because I think there's more vulnerable D seats in the rural parts than there are vulnerable R seats in the suburban areas. But I think we're looking at minimal movement, honestly, Jacqueline, +1, +2, either way. In the Senate, the hottest races seem to be McDaniel, and then the one out east, the Wheeler seat, which has got some amazing advertising running out there. But again, it's a rural area, so advantage Republicans.
I just have to say, I went to college with Philip Wheeler. I cannot believe that dude's in the state Senate, but nevertheless, be that as it may, I agree with everything he said. I talked to a Republican and a Democrat last night, assuming you'd ask that. The Democrat thought at best they pick up 1 or 2 seats in the House. At worst, they lose 2 seats. The Republican thought at worst, lose 1 seat, at best pick up 4 or 5. So my guess is it's probably add 1 or 2. The reality is the seismic shift that was coming eventually happened in 2016. That's when it happened. We will play at the margins for the next decade. Democrats will go up a couple, Republicans will get up a couple, but we are where we are because I think now the state has finally done what every other state did, which is aligned to its interests. I mean, as a Democrat, I don't love that, but it's just reality. I mean, this state is probably 60-40 Republican when it comes to how it is, maybe 57-43 or something. And I think it'll just fluctuate kind of back and forth around that range, probably in perpetuity, at least for the next decade.
I think I'm right about this. This will be the last race that we run under the current lines.
Yes, they are supposed to redistrict this year, 2021.
Yeah, we redrew. Remember in 2010 when we redrew it before, or 2011, I guess. Remember, you had split control of the legislature. Steve Bashir was a governor. I mean, it was a different political dynamic in Frankfurt, and now Republicans control the whole legislature and will continue to control it. So the redistricting process could, in theory, advantage Republicans if they choose to draw the lines that way. Bashir could veto it, but I guess a simple override could take him out of the process. So that could be different next time around.
All right, we have hit 3 o'clock, but I'm going to let you guys do some final comments because while we've covered a ton of ground today, and I think it's been an incredible conversation and very civil, very good.
I like Scott, by the way. I like Scott, a Republican political commentator. To me, that's like 3 words that I never would assume I would like but I actually like Scott because I think he's a genuine person despite the perfect TV hair and working for Mitch McConnell. So I actually like Scott. I hope it comes off that way. And I hope he would say the same about me.
It does come off.
I know Matt is what I was saying. I like Matt too. I mean, the reality is, we don't have enough. I mean, Kentucky's an interesting place in terms of political sort of media and just talk. We don't have enough like discourse in this state. We're one of the few states that doesn't have like, lots of sort of political pod discourses out there, whether it's on a blog or whatever. And so every time, Jacqueline, you get us together, I think it's really important because we need more discourse. We need more Matts. We need more Jacquelines. We need more, Scott's getting together and having conversations because it makes us a better state, frankly, and it also shows that we can discuss these issues without hating each other, which in today's world is an important thing. I think we need more of it. So one of the reasons I like Matt is because he loves to talk about this stuff, and he does it in a way that I think is extremely accessible for a lot of people who maybe would never have thought they would have enjoyed listening to a political conversation.
Absolutely. And you're both the same people on and off camera in my experience. So that helps a lot as well. And again, before we do the final comments, I really appreciate you guys coming to do this again with us today. I agree with you, Scott. I think more of this type of discourse is needed. So it's very important that we've done this, especially with the great timing with everything this week and right before the election. So if I had a coin, I would flip it. I'll let you guys choose who wants to go first in terms of final comments, but just to kind of wrap everything up, what we've covered and what we didn't that you want people to hear.
Let's make final predictions, Scott, just as to what we think will happen, just for the heck of it. I think Biden wins. He takes Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Arizona, whatever that ends up being numbers wise. I don't know, but it gives him a handful of states more than he needs, so he wins. I'd say McConnell wins 56-44, whatever that ends up being. I guess that's 12. And I guess those are the 2 races that are most important. And I think the Democrats win the Senate 51-49. They take North Carolina and they win one of the Georgia races to make it 51-49.
Interesting. So you think there's a scenario where they win one Georgia race, but not the other?
I do. I think the support the minister will get will be a lot higher than the support Ossoff will get. And I think that makes the difference.
I think there's a 60% chance Biden will win. I think Trump has a chance to win. I think, he's likely to win. As I said, I think if Biden wins Florida, it's an early night. If Trump wins Florida and holds his bigger states, we could be counting for some time. I think it's likelier than not that Democrats control the Senate. But I feel better about some of the ancillary races than I did as a Republican before, this week. I think turnout is going to smash records. I think Kentucky is going to be looked upon as a model for how to sort of do something new and largely get it right vis-a-vis some other states. I think we're going to be seeing more of Mike Adams in the future. I think if I had to just project into the future a political issue that has nothing to do with candidates, I think the issues surrounding public discourse, political discourse, tech companies, and just sort of how we interact with information is going to come under a pretty fair amount of scrutiny at the state and federal level in the months ahead, and that will be true no matter which parties control which branches. And so I think if I were looking for issues in the future that I think are going to dominate next year, that could be one. And by the way, I also think this: no matter who wins the White House, better days are ahead, and I think we're going to have a vaccine sooner rather than later, and we can hopefully get our lives back to normal sooner rather than later when we do. So anyway, God bless you, Jacqueline. Matt, always good to see you. But I guess I believe in American institutions. I believe in the durability of American institutions, and I believe brighter days are nearer than they may seem right now.
Wow, that put a tear in my eye. Charles Booker versus Rand Paul in 2022 is coming, and it'll be not as much of a race money-wise as this one, but we in the media industry will welcome it. Charles Booker, Rand Paul will be another high-profile battle.
As a strategist, I would just say the person that probably spends the most on radio, particularly sports radio, will probably win. Just as advice to the team.
I totally agree with that. Totally.
All right. I want to thank you guys both again so much. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. This has been recorded. It'll be on YouTube and up online later today. So incredible conversation. Look forward to seeing what happens over the next week, but appreciate both of you joining us to give us your predictions and your thoughts on the races. So thank you both so much again.
Thanks, Jacqueline. See you, man.
Have a great rest of the day, everybody.